Our studio guest in this half hour of the program is our own Twin Falls County prosecutor, Grant Loebs. He joins us on a monthly basis, and we talk about usually some legal issue. Sometimes it's a local issue, sometimes it's a national or state issue. Today, of course, well, by the end of the week, by Thursday, all of the political talk is going to be centered on the hearings going on in Washington. Hillary Clinton is scheduled to testify before the select committee, and I guess it's called the select committee, chaired by Trey Gowdy of South Carolina, looking into the Benghazi matters. First of all, I'd like to point out it's 8:33. It's 50. Bill Colley with you as well on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. First of all, welcome back.
Thanks. Nice to be here.
It's called a select committee, or is it just a stand? How does that break down?
I think this is a select committee. It's a specific committee that's been engaged to do a particular thing with specifically chosen members on it.
In other words, it has a sunset provision.
Right, it has defined mission. Whether the mission defines it, not a period of time necessarily.
Media talk the last couple of weeks has been, well, this is all just a political witch hunt. And my feeling is, first of all, it's Washington. Everything's political. Number two, even if there's politics involved in it, it doesn't mean that the mission of the committee is wrong. They've still got to get to the bottom of all of this.
Yeah, well, like anything that investigates another branch of government or another government agency's actions, it investigates political people for things they did in political office. So it's inevitably political. Whether it's specifically designed to target a political candidate or whether it's designed to get to the bottom of a question is another matter. But everything, as you say, is political. You can't investigate the president or the State Department or his Secretary of State without it being political, and it's obviously made more political by the fact that the Secretary of State is running for president.
Trey Gowdy, the chair of the committee, seems to have a very stellar reputation, and for those of us who've seen him at work, when he's publicly, interrogating is probably too strong a word, but maybe not in his case. But because he had a successful run as a federal prosecutor, he is very deliberate in the way he approaches what he's doing, and I don't at all see it as grandstanding.
Well, I think he does a good job. He's certainly competent, and as you say, his questioning of witnesses is impressive. He's obviously been doing this for a number of years. He knows what he's doing. I don't think that his supporting cast is always what it should be, but you can't choose all of your colleagues when you're in Congress.
Well, Elijah Cummings, who's one of the Democrats on that committee, when people say it's politicized, if Cummings' job is there to try and derail the mission, then obviously it is political, but it's political coming from another direction.
Sure, and of course, everything he's doing is political as well. I mean, his goal and the stated goal of the former Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, has from the beginning been to participate in this committee specifically to run interference for the White House and for the former Secretary of State. And if you'll recall, back at the beginning when this committee was being formed, there was some question about whether the Democrats would even participate because they alleged early on that everything that we needed to know we already knew, and that there wasn't any point in rehashing everything and dragging this Benghazi issue on any longer. So their position early on was not even to participate. And then they made a specific decision, which was quite public, to participate, but to participate for the purpose of making sure that, for want of another word, the other side was brought out and that there was somebody running interference for the White House and for Secretary Clinton.
When
they've been quite outspoken about that.
Sure. And when this committee was set up, I think that people have to realize there's two separate things going on in Mrs. Clinton's life. Benghazi is one issue, email is another, but it appears that the email story sort of came out during these hearings about Benghazi, and yet it's an entirely different matter now in the hands of the FBI.
Right. That's a separate thing because there are potential criminal investigations. Well, there's absolutely a criminal investigation going on, potential criminal charges as a result of her, I think, what is at least clear incompetence in dealing with her email server, her the state secrets that are contained on the emails, and the question of whether it goes beyond mere incompetence and to possible breaches of the law is still being investigated by the FBI. But the way that ties in with the Benghazi committee, obviously, is some of the emails deal with the issues that the Benghazi committee is dealing with. That is, what the heck happened, and what did the Secretary of State know, and what did the State Department do, and what were the policies, and why wasn't that Benghazi situation handled with even minimal competence, rather than turned into such a mess as it was.
I don't think a lot of us really have any understanding. I don't care what people's political background is. I don't think most people have any real understanding still of what happened in Benghazi, and I think that some people want to make sure that we never actually know that as well.
Well, obviously, if mistakes were made, the people who made the mistakes don't want those mistakes given any more airtime than necessary. I think it's clear that there were a lot of mistakes made, both before the incident happened, with regard to what those people were doing in Libya, why they were in Benghazi in the first place, and with regard to how the security was set up and how the requests for additional security were dealt with, and then, of course, how the requests for aid once the attack began were dealt with. And not even to mention all the cover up that happened afterwards with the dude with the videotape and all of that. So yeah, I think there are a lot of questions that need to be answered. I don't have the answers. I don't know what happened there.
Well, hold that thought for a moment, and we'll take some telephone calls too in the next segment of the program. Twin Falls County Prosecutor Grant Loebs in studio with us. Our studio guest is Grant Loebs, Twin Falls County Prosecutor, joins us on a monthly basis to talk about some issues that are sometimes locally relevant, sometimes issues that are relevant on the statewide level or the national level. And we're talking about the Benghazi hearings this morning. And on Thursday, Hillary Clinton is scheduled to testify before that House Select Committee chaired by Trey Gowdy. If you'd like to reach the prosecutor while he's in the studio with us, you can. It's 736-0300. It's 844-49. Bill Colley with you as well on Top Story. And we have a caller with us on News Radio 1310 KLIX. You're on the air.
Good morning, Bill. Good morning, prosecutor, counselor, or however one addresses the prosecuting attorney. I've got a question that's a bit closer to home. I've been told that Idaho State Police records are only kept for 5 years. First of all, I'd like to know if that's indeed correct. They're not microfiche. They're not kept anywhere. And how would one go about finding a case that originated with the Idaho State Police if one knew the lead investigator and all the circumstances but did not have the case number? And I'll listen off the air unless you've got a specific question for me right now.
No, that's fine. I understand the question. ISP records, like any criminal investigation records, are kept much longer than 5 years. There are different policies with regard to when agencies can get rid of certain records. It depends upon what type of an investigation it was, what the disposition of it was, whether it's an open case or a closed case. But they're kept for a lot longer than 5 years. Some are kept indefinitely. The way to go about getting information about a record that's kept by any agency, you don't need to know the case number, but if you know where the record is kept, who had something to do with it, what the name of the person being investigated was, what the incident was, you simply write a letter requesting information to that agency saying, you investigated Joe Schmo in 1998 for burglary. I'd like all the information about that case under the Freedom of Information Act, or the Idaho version of that, and you ask for those records. If they're records that are kept and available under that act, then you would be able to get those. The agency has either 3 days to provide those records to you, or to let you know that they can't for some reason, and then they can get extensions on that. But if it's a closed investigation, you should be able to get those documents. If it's still open or pending, then you won't be able to, because there's an exception keeping open investigations from being released.
846, Grant Loebs is our guest in the studio. You're listening to News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. This is Top Story, and you're up next.
Good morning, Mr. Loebs. How you doing?
How you doing?
Tell me, I could be sadly mistaken, but wasn't General Ice already handed the verdict on Benghazi that they could not find anybody guilty? I could be mistaken on that, but I'm pretty sure he already did that. I was wondering if you can clear me up on that.
Well, there have, I think what the caller's alluding to is there have been other committees that have dealt with the Benghazi question. And it's not a matter necessarily of finding anybody guilty or not guilty. This is not a trial, but an investigatory committee to find out exactly what happened. And I think that's what the caller is referring to. Certainly nobody's been charged with any criminal wrongdoing here. And I don't know that anybody will be. The question we discussed earlier with regard to Hillary Clinton's emails is a completely separate question in terms of criminal wrongdoing. And that is, as we mentioned, is in the hands of the FBI, and we'll see what that investigation turns up.
Want to thank the caller, and you're up next. You're on the air with Grant Loebs.
Hello?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I've got a question for you. With the DUI in the state of Idaho, is there any precedence for a case to get the DUI removed earlier than, or how long do they stay on your record?
Well, it'll stay on your record forever if something isn't done, as you say, to remove it. You can petition after a period of time to have convictions removed from your record. They will show up to some degree. They will show up if a prosecutor or a policeman needs to find out what your previous record was. But they can be removed for lots of purposes if you file a motion to have the case dismissed. You'd need to be done with your probationary period. You'd need to be done with any sentence that you have, and after that period of time, you can either petition by yourself, or I would recommend you get an attorney to petition the court to have that case dismissed. And that's a relatively common thing for people to do because it helps for work and driving jobs and so forth to have that removed.
That's what I needed. I wasn't even driving. I was sitting in my car with the keys in the ignition, and people don't know that sometimes, but be aware.
Yeah, that counts. If you're in the vehicle and you have control of the vehicle, and keys in the ignition count. So, yeah, if you're going to be intoxicated, turn the car off, go inside, go home, get a ride. Anytime you're in control of a vehicle under the influence, you run the jeopardy of being arrested for DUI.
Yeah, call the wife because her wrath will only last about 3 days. The wrath of the court will last a lot longer. We have another caller with us. It's coming up on 10 of 9, 49 at our studio. Bill Colley with you as well. Grant Loebs is our guest. He's the Twin Falls County prosecutor, and you're next. You're on News Radio 1310 KLIX.
Good morning. I was wondering if Mr. Loebs would speak to the issue of selective enforcement. I know it may be it's not necessarily philosophical, but the view that the general public may see instances where some people do not even get investigated, or if they do, they are, I wouldn't say exonerated, but they are let go on with the help of other people who may have authority to grant pardons or just to say that we're not going to investigate or prosecute this case because we don't see any merit to it. So I guess it's a philosophical question as how it affects the general public when they see people who are most likely or certainly guilty of a crime, yet they are not prosecuted by the authorities. And I'm not talking about the Twin Falls County Prosecutor's Office. I mean, it's a general philosophical. If he could just speak to that, I'd like to hear what he has to say.
Well, there are a number of issues there. Some of them are troubling, and some of them are just the regular course of business in our criminal system. Dealing with the troubling ones first, if there are cases where people are not prosecuted either because they're wealthy or because they have influence or because they have friends in the police department, the sheriff's department, the prosecutor's office, and they are in fact guilty of crimes that other people would be convicted of, then that's an issue that should be troubling to anybody. And to the extent that that happens, that's a regrettable and you know improper use of force and power by the people in office. Uh, the other part is just the normal way business is done. Each case is individual. Each case deals with individuals. Each case deals with people who have a particular past and whose conduct in a particular case is unique. We've all, or at least I speak for myself, I have been stopped by policemen over my life, and I'm talking about many years ago before I was in this position. And the policeman will either give you a ticket or he'll give you a warning. Certainly, every time I was stopped in my life, I could have gotten a ticket. Sometimes the policeman, though, he says, well, it's early in the morning and, maybe you had a long day at the office and it's 2 in the morning and you didn't quite stop for that stop sign, so I'll let you go. Sometimes a policeman does that, makes that on-the-spot decision. Sometimes you get a ticket for exactly the same thing, and sometimes the guy who blows the stop sign right after you gets a ticket for the same thing. Now, is that selective enforcement? To some degree it is, but each officer is taking the facts and the people that he meets into consideration individually. Now, that doesn't mean that because you like the guy, you let him get away with stuff. In the prosecutor's office, for instance, there are every person who commits, one particular type of crime doesn't get the exact same sentence. We take into account whether you've done it before, what you meant to do, whether it was, not quite accidental, but whether there's a good explanation for why you were doing what you were doing. The character of the person is taken into account. And obviously, the evidence that we have is taken into account. Some cases we have really good evidence. Some cases it's not that great. So you see negotiations on a case where one person will get a better sentence than another for a similar crime. That is the way the system is designed across the board. There isn't any mechanical way that everybody who commits a violation of a particular statute gets exactly the same sentence. If there were, you wouldn't obviously need judges. You would barely need prosecutors, and your police could be, robots. So I don't know exactly what the caller means, but the one is a form of either petty or gross corruption. The first one I talked about, just letting your friends off, and the other is just the way the system is designed to take into account individual cases, and discretion is given to both law enforcement officers on the street and to prosecutors in the court to handle cases individually. And I don't know if that answers the question, but that's basically the way it works.
Well, and, I think too, when we were talking a little bit earlier about Hillary Clinton's email server, the case in Washington that it gets most compared to is that of General David Petraeus, who could have done some prison time. Mm-hmm. But General David Petraeus is truly an American hero and had done some great service to his country beforehand. You have to take something like that into account. Or you don't have to, but it's probably not a bad idea to do that.
Well, it is, and it's always taken into account to some degree. And to some degree, frankly, people who are prominent get more scrutiny because it's clear to the person who's making the decision that all eyes are on them at that time. I mean, I don't know whether Petraeus' sentence was light or harsh for what he did because I don't know the precedent of other cases like that. But it's certainly true in certain cases that people who are prominent, high-profile people stand more likelihood of being convicted if they get caught than other people because there's so much pressure on the prosecutor, the policeman, the judge to do the right thing when everybody's watching, and to not be seen as being biased. So it kind of cuts both ways. But I do understand the caller's question. There is no way that you can take a measuring stick and compare every similar case to every other similar case and assume that the same outcome happens every time, because there are so many variables.
I got stopped about a year and a half ago. I was driving a loaner car, which was electric, which was confusing to me. And I drove through the downtown area. All the street lights were on. I thought my lights were on. And Suzanne was sitting in the passenger seat. She said, "Look, there's a police officer parked by the funeral home. About a block down the street, he stopped me. And he said, 'Your lights are off.'" And I could have said, "Well, what's the problem? But instead I said, "Yeah, I probably can expect that, because it's the first time I've been driving this car and I'm having problems with the switches." And with that, he broke into laughter, said, "I think it's this one." Turned it on for me and said,
Yeah.
Go ahead.
And obviously you could have gotten a ticket for that, and the policeman decided not to give you one. I was in San Francisco one time on a vacation, and I was driving my car and I ran a red light, and I had no idea where up was down or right was left. I mean, I couldn't figure out the intersection. It had all kinds of strange markings on it. Policeman walked up to me, took a long look at my license plate before he got to me, which at that time said Famous Potatoes right on it. He walked up to me and he said, "I'm going to cut you a break because I don't think you got electricity back in Idaho." So there are always exceptions.
You've got people's business to do, so you're out early today. We'll see Steve Millington coming up in just a few minutes. Want to thank Grant Loebs joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And we'll see you again in a month or so.
Yeah.
He is the Twin Falls County prosecutor, taking some time out with us this morning and answering some legal questions as well. It's 50. News is next. It's 8:59, and that's coming up from Fox in just a moment. Hope you can stick around.